Baker-Miller pink, also called drunk tank pink, with RGB values 255, 145, 175, was sold as a way to control prisoner behavior using nothing but paint color. And what happened when the science behind it fell apart became a cautionary tale about pseudoscience. This is the story of how one specific shade of pink paint promised calm inmates and ended up exposing wishful thinking instead. Let's start with what this paint actually is. Baker-Miller pink, also known as P618 or Schauss pink, is a very particular shade created in the late 1970s by psychologist Alexander Schauss, who directed the American Institute for Biosocial Research in Tacoma, Washington. Schauss began experimenting with color psychology and environmental psychology, and he eventually mixed this pink by combining 1 part red trim semi-gloss outdoor paint with 8 parts white indoor latex paint by volume, then claimed that looking at it could calm people down through chromotherapy principles. Alexander Schauss persuaded the directors of a Naval Correctional Facility in Seattle to try the color in their short-term confinement cells, and on March 1st of 1979, those cells were painted Baker-Miller pink. A Navy report later claimed that from the start of that procedure, there were no incidents of erratic or hostile behavior during the initial phase of confinement, and the report even stated that only 15 minutes of exposure in the pink cell was enough to cut the potential for violent or aggressive behavior. Once those claims were out in the world, Baker-Miller pink moved into jails, prisons, and police holding cells across the United States and overseas. A key example came from Santa Clara County Jail in California, where Lieutenant Paul Becker had cells painted in this vivid pink, and initially observed that inmates seemed calmer after roughly 15 minutes. The twist was that Becker also reported a reverse effect after about 20 minutes. The same bright pink that seemed soothing at first became irritating, and incident rates actually increased. The University of Iowa football coach Hayden Fry ordered the visiting locker room at Kinnick Stadium painted Baker-Miller pink, based on the idea that it would make opponents more passive. Sports culture turned the color into a psychological weapon, while critics argued that the entire tactic rested on stereotypes linking pink to femininity and weakness. But here's where the story becomes even stranger. Imagine walking into a room where every wall, every corner, and every surface is covered in the exact same bright pink color. At first, it might seem harmless, maybe even cheerful. But psychologists have long known that colors can influence how we feel, think, and behave. For centuries, people have associated different colors with different emotions. Red is often linked with energy, excitement, and danger. Blue is connected to calmness and trust. Green is associated with nature and balance. Because of these associations, researchers began wondering whether colors could do more than simply affect mood. Could they actually influence human behavior? This idea became known as color psychology. Businesses quickly became interested. Fast food restaurants frequently use reds, oranges, and yellows because these colors are believed to stimulate appetite and encourage customers to eat quickly. Luxury brands often rely on black because it communicates sophistication and exclusivity. Hospitals sometimes use soft blues and greens to create a sense of calm among patients. Once people accepted that colors could affect emotions, it wasn't a huge leap to believe that colors might also influence aggression. That was exactly the environment in which Baker-Miller pink exploded in popularity. Newspapers loved the story. Television programs discussed it. Prison administrators were fascinated by the possibility that a simple bucket of paint could reduce violence without expensive training programs or additional security measures. The idea sounded almost magical. No medication, no therapy, no special equipment. Just paint the walls pink and aggressive behavior would supposedly disappear. As the story spread, people began testing the color in places far beyond prisons. Some schools experimented with pink rooms for disruptive students. Coaches painted athletic facilities pink. Police departments created holding cells using the color. In certain cases, decision-makers invested money based largely on reports and anecdotes rather than rigorous scientific evidence. This highlights an important lesson about human psychology. People love simple solutions to complicated problems. Aggression is an incredibly complex behavior, influenced by biology, environment, stress, personality, social conditions, and countless other factors. Yet Baker-Miller-Pink offered an incredibly simple explanation. What if the solution wasn't changing people? What if the solution was simply changing the walls around them? That idea was irresistible. But there was another factor helping the pink paint gain popularity: expectation. When people expect something to work, they often begin noticing evidence that confirms their expectations.
Psychologists call this confirmation bias. Imagine a prison guard who believes the pink room reduces aggression. When an inmate behaves calmly, the guard remembers it. When another inmate becomes angry, that event may seem less important or be blamed on something else. Over time, people can convince themselves that a treatment is working even when objective measurements show little or no effect. This phenomenon appears throughout history. From miracle health products to questionable educational methods, many ideas become popular because early reports sound impressive. Only later, when researchers conduct larger and more controlled studies, does the evidence become less convincing. Baker-Miller-Pink may be one of the most famous examples of this process. Another interesting question involves culture itself. Why pink? Would the experiment have attracted the same attention if the walls had been painted beige, gray, or light blue? Many critics argued that the color's reputation may have been influenced by social stereotypes. In Western culture, pink has often been associated with softness, gentleness, and femininity. Some researchers suggested that people may have unconsciously assumed pink would weaken aggression because of these cultural associations, rather than because of any biological effect.
If that's true, then the psychological impact might not come from the color itself, but from what people believe the color represents. And that distinction is extremely important. Because if expectations are driving the effect, then the paint isn't controlling behavior. Human beliefs are. By the 1980s and 1990s, scientists began demanding stronger evidence. Researchers wanted controlled experiments, measurable results, and repeatable findings. They wanted to know whether Baker-Miller-Pink truly had a unique influence on aggression, or whether the entire phenomenon was being exaggerated by enthusiasm, media attention, and selective observations. The answer would eventually challenge many of the original claims and transform Baker-Miller-Pink from a revolutionary behavioral tool into one of psychology's most fascinating cautionary tales. Inside prisons and research labs, the science started to push back. Studies by researchers like James E. Gilliam and David Unruh did not find the dramatic drops in heart rate and strength that Schauss described. In 1987, psychologists Pamela Profusek and David Rainey ran a lab experiment with 46 students placed in either a red room or a Baker-Miller-Pink room. Although students in the pink room reported lower state anxiety, there were no differences in grip strength or motor precision tasks. The most serious challenge arrived in 2014, when psychologist Oliver Genschow at Ghent University and colleagues ran an experiment with 59 male prisoners randomly assigned to spend time in either pink or gray rooms for 3 days. After 3 days, aggression decreased among prisoners in both the pink and the gray cells. The color of the walls made no difference at all. Despite these pushbacks, the color has lingered. As of 2015, around 20% of prisons and police stations in Switzerland included at least one Baker-Miller-Pink cell. Today, the story of Baker-Miller-Pink sits somewhere between quirky trivia and a warning about pseudoscience, a powerful mixture of wishful thinking, novelty, and cultural stereotypes that captured how eager people can be to believe that something as simple as paint on a wall can control the human mind.